Hello, it's Scott Manley here, and today I want to talk about Planet X. So, Planet X is back in the news. You might have seen headlines that said, Planet X has been discovered. There is another planet out in the outer solar system. Okay, hasn't been discovered. What we do have is some really interesting evidence based upon observations of other objects that could be explained by the existence of another planet. So, let's rewind the clock a little. A couple of years ago, there was a discovery announced of a new object called 2012 VP113. It was actually nicknamed Biden because of the VP in its name. And this was an object which the perihelion was 80 AU, and its aphelion was way out over a couple of hundred AU. So this was in a highly eccentric orbit in the outer solar system, and interestingly, its perihelion didn't come anywhere near Neptune. Now, Neptune's orbit is 30 AU. You instantly have a problem with these. How do you put an object out into that orbit? Because normally things get kicked into these orbits by having a close encounter with a planet, but if you're not coming down any closer than 80 AU, you're not getting anywhere near Neptune to get kicked up. Now, the authors of this paper, they wanted to think about origins, and so they looked at it. They also looked at another example of a similar object, one called Sedna. Now, Sedna goes out further still, I believe, and it was discovered by a guy called Mike Brown, who we'll hear more about later. Now, the authors of this paper, they said, well, wait a second, we notice an interesting correlation. They noticed that the argument of perihelion of these two objects were actually pretty close together. The orbits are roughly aligned. Then they looked at some other objects that had perihelion outside Neptune's orbit and very large semi-major axis, right? So they looked for perihelion greater than 30 and semi-major axis greater than 150. So these were pretty eccentric orbits. And they noticed that all of these were very much aligned in the sky, unusually so. If you just had these things floating out in space doing these orbits for billions of years, we would have expected them to kind of been randomly oriented across the sky because of lots of just random perturbations. To have them in one area of the sky said perhaps there's something shepherding them. Regardless, the original 2014 paper that was about 2012 VP113, they kind of mentioned that maybe a planet could herd these things using something called the Kozai mechanism, which is a fancy gravitational effect which occurs due to periodicities, basically, and it causes an oscillation of the orbit. They didn't go too deeply into it, but last year, January 2015, a paper was published where somebody had gone really deeply into it, and they said, we think this could be due to two planets in the outer solar system herding these objects using the Kozai mechanism. Again, hey, great. And that was all very good, and it got a little bit of attention. But then this new paper by Mike Brown, the guy that discovered Sedna, he actually set out to disprove this hypothesis. That was good science. Go and take a look at some prediction and try to disprove it. And so first of all, they pointed out that if it was a Kozai mechanism, you would expect two groupings pointing in opposite directions, and we actually only see that in one direction. Secondly, he was concerned that of the 13 objects they were using, that some of them might have been affected by Neptune. So what they did was they took the data set of 13 and they tested the orbits backwards and forwards in time just to check to see if any of them got seriously affected by Neptune. And so they actually threw away 7 of the objects and were left with 6. Then when they actually calculated the probability of these things being aligned, given that they would expect them to be random, they came up with odds of something like 0.07% chance of this happening randomly. So that was a relatively strong result. So they kind of wound things forward and tried to come up with an object which would herd these things using some sort of mechanism. Obviously, they came up with the idea of a 10 Earth mass planet with a perihelion of 200 AU and an aphelion could be way further out. This thing would orbit take for tens of thousands of years, they said, for a single orbit. And they've come up with an approximate idea of where to look in the sky. But it is a huge area of the sky, and something 10 Earth masses at that distance is going to be very cold, very hard to see. Now, a few years ago, the WISE spacecraft, the Wide Field Infrared Survey Explorer, did photograph the entire sky in infrared, and they specifically excluded any planets that were larger than Saturn. So we know it can't be as big as Saturn, which is fine because 10 Earth masses is smaller than Saturn. So anyway, they're going to get telescope time, they're going to look for it, maybe they'll find out, or maybe somebody else will come up with a better explanation for why these things appear aligned. Maybe it is just a chance. Maybe there's some sort of observational effect which we haven't realized. These are all possibilities, and it will be good science to prove or disprove this thing. Now, if it was to be discovered, this wouldn't be the first planet to be discovered by a mathematical prediction. That would have been Neptune, of course. You see, funnily enough, if you think about it, there's only 2 planets that have been discovered after the classical planets in the solar system, Uranus and Neptune. Uranus was discovered with a telescope. Neptune was predicted by Leverrier. And when he finally got somebody to look through a telescope at the region of the sky he wanted, they discovered it, like, in that night. So, 50%, a half of the planets in our solar system that have been discovered since the invention of the telescope have been discovered by mathematics, right? So, it's not such a ridiculous notion that the gravitational effects of an object could be used to infer it, and therefore it's worth taking this very seriously, but it's not worth saying there is a 10th planet out there absolutely for sure, because it's a long way from being proved. But it'll be great. It'll be a great journey to find out. There will be interesting math done, whatever. I'm Scott Manley. Fly safe.